The FS Labs A320X comes with a really realistic refueling panel, which you can use either on the same computer as your sim is running, or indeed from a remote source, either your iPad. I think you have to use Google Chrome if you're doing it on an iPad, or I would usually use my laptop, but obviously for filming purposes I'm going to use the fuel panel on the same computer as my sim is running, but usually I'd use my laptop. As long as you have the correct address in the address bar, then you can basically access the fuel panel from anywhere, as long as the FS Labs A320X is selected and running. So for today's flight we've opted for a fuel figure of 8 tons. We're going to pre-select that figure using the increase switch here. This is exactly like the fuel panel that you would find in a receptacle on the fuselage of the real airplane. So there we are, 8 tons. We're going to take the guard off the mode selector switch and select it to refuel. And you can see the quantities increasing in the left and right tanks, and the actual fuel figure increasing as well. You can also see on the ECAM screen the refueling legend showing that the airplane is refueling, and then once that's complete we'll select the seatbelt signs to on. In the meantime we can get going with the FMGS preparation. So first of all, on the initial page, if I just clear that, you can see we have the initial data showing the correct aircraft type, A320-200, correct engine type, the CFM56, and the navigation database is active and in date as well. If we go into the RAD nav and just make sure that all navigation aids have been deselected before we start, you can see that although we have indications on the VOR section of the RAD nav page, because the ident is shown in small writing, this indicates that it has been automatically tuned, so we have no manually tuned aids in the RAD nav page, and so we're good to go. We can therefore select the initial page, and the FS Labs A320X has a fantastic feature which allows you to download information from the AOC via ACARS as you would in the real airplane, and you can set all of this information if required individually. So the from to would be the ICAO codes for our departure, which in our case is Echo Golf Golf Delta for Bristol, / destination ICAO code, and Dubrovnik is Lima Delta Delta uniform, so that will be ours. However, the FS Labs A320X has a really nice feature which simulates the AOC. So what we can do, as long as we've pre-filed our flight plan either on VATSIM or on IVAO, I'm on VATSIM, and I've pre-filed our flight plan. So selecting the flight number here as filed with VATSIM, and then selecting the init request feature, and hopefully our flight plan information will pop up automatically. Yep, there it is. So we have the flight plan uplink legend here, and it's taken us from Bristol to Dubrovnik, and our alternate airfield is Lima Yankee Papa Golf. Cost index today, according to our flight plan, is 10. Estimated cruising level, flight level 370, and the temperature for the cruise on our flight plan is showing -53. Tropopause 36900. And unlike an aircraft like the 737, the inertial reference system actually automatically updates its position. What we can do, however, is just make sure that that position has been correctly inserted by looking at the stand coordinates on our aerodrome chart. We're on stand 8 here at Bristol. Perfect. The next page on the init, we can insert our estimated zero fuel weight at this stage, which is 51.7. And we haven't yet had the zero fuel weight CFG. We'll get that once we receive the load sheet, so we'll leave that blank for the time being. But our fuel, we're estimating 8 tons block fuel. And you can see the FMGS then produces its own fuel predictions, and we can select some of these to make sure that they're tallying up with our own fuel settings. So the taxi is actually going to be 0.1, which gives us about 10 minutes taxi time. The route reserve, which is our contingency fuel basically, it's a standard figure of 5%. That's giving us 286 kilograms, so 0.3 is absolutely fine. Our alternate fuel, we're looking at 0.8 according to the flight plan. And a final reserve of 1 ton. We can also at this stage insert the trip wind. As far as I know, this is only for ground predictions. It's not actually used by the FMGS for time predictions in flight, but it can be selected for ground prediction purposes. Again, I'd need confirmation on that, so do forgive me, but we will insert the figure anyway. The flight plan is telling us that we're expecting a tailwind today of 17 knots. The A320X doesn't yet have the secondary flight plan feature implemented. I believe they were a little unhappy with the way the logic was working in that particular part of the simulation, so they left it until they could improve it, and I believe it's going to be coming up in a subsequent service pack. But in the secondary flight plan, we may include that in further videos on the channel, but secondary flight plan basically would routinely be just an active copy of the flight plan, but you can use it also to plan certain secondary contingencies. So you can maybe able to modify the flight plan at a suitable waypoint so as to plan for a return back to Bristol in the event of a malfunction. Or you could perhaps even enter a different runway or departure if the clearance is changed, perhaps during the taxi out. And so all of these contingencies can be set in the secondary flight plan as required, but as I say, it's not implemented at the moment. We'll perhaps look at it in a later program. Having a little look at the rad nav then, what we're really doing here is setting up backups for the departure. It's not an RNAV GNSS departure, so it would be standard procedure to have radio navigation aid backups. And we need the Bristol NDB, which I'm going to select on the right. You can see we have several Bravo Romeo Indias. One's about 1,500 miles away. This is the one that we want, 414. We also want the ILS, both for the DME for the departure and also for a possible return onto runway 27 if required. So that's the correct ident and the correct frequency, 11015, 268 's the correct inbound track. And I'm going to select Brecon VOR on the left, 11745, tracker 102 degrees, and that's for Badim. And on the right we'll select the Honolulu VOR, 11365, (219 degrees) for the inbound to Badim. Next we need to look at the flight plan, and as per real life the flight plan has been loaded without the departure and arrival procedures. So as we've said, we want the Badim 1 X-ray departure from Bristol, So to select the departure, we're going to line select against Bristol, or laterally revise as Airbus would say. Select departure. It's runway 27 and it comes up as the first departure of the Badim 1 X-ray. Insert, and in it goes. You can see already on the navigation display that the flight plan departure routing has taken the correct shape. It's saying 3,000 feet by our initial turning point and then 6,000 feet on the intercept to the 039 degree inbound radial to Honolulu. The arrival routing that we're expecting today is going to be via Nera. So we laterally revise against Dubrovnik, select our arrival, and at the current time these are just provisional plans, so we'll go for ILS 1-2 as there's calm winds at Dubrovnik today, so we'll review this once we get closer to the airport. But for the time being, we'll select the ILS for 1-2 and the Nera arrival. So the departure and arrival procedures are now inserted, and it's a good idea to go into plan mode on the EFIS control panel and now just step through the various points on the flight plan to make sure that the flight plan shape is roughly correct, that we don't have any major anomalies in the routing, and we're going roughly where we're expecting to go. At this stage I'm going to turn up the range a little bit more so we can get a clearer picture of the routing. And there's the arrival into Dubrovnik. So the routing is looking pretty good. We can also use the white airway markers here in the FMGS to cross-check the various points on the route, airway by airway. So we can go back onto ARC mode, turn the range down a bit. The next thing to consider will be the aircraft performance, and we'll complete that once we've had all the load sheet figures. You can also see that fueling is now complete, and the fuel has just come up with the fuel slip, which we agree with. We cross-check it with the flight plan to make sure it tallies up with our desired fuel figure, and we're also going to look at the fuel page on the lower ECAM screen to check that the fuel has been correctly loaded and balanced in the tanks, and as you can see it's perfectly balanced today, which means at this stage we can select the seatbelt signs to on and select the fuel pumps on as well. We also want to check the instruments at this stage now that the IRSs have been aligned. So checking the airspeed tape, we've 0 there, and on the ISIS and on the first officer side. Climb, nav, 1FD2. Heading we have about 088 twice, 3, 4, and then cross-checking that with the standby compass, and as you can see it pretty much tallies up. We have no flags on the instruments. We can select on the navigation display the navigation aids as required, so we have Brecon VOR now on the left showing on the navigation display, and on the right in the green indication we have the Bristol NDB. And on the altimeters we have a QNH of 1012, which gives us about 630 feet, which is right for Bristol. Cross-checked on the first officer's side, have 8,000 blue, become flight level 80 at the transition altitude of 6,000 feet. So at this stage we can run the before start checklist to the line. Cockpit preparation has been completed. Signs on and auto. Fuel 8 tons and balanced. Parking brake is set, altimeters QNH 1012 is set and cross-checked, instruments have been checked, and the briefing is complete. I haven't done actually a departure briefing for you. If that would be of interest, do let me know in the comments section, but as it's a little bit long-winded, we'll leave the briefing for the time being. So that's the before start checklist to the line complete. So we've had the load sheet brought up to us now, so we can confirm the figures in the init page. We have a 0 fuel weight 51.7 and a 0 fuel weight CFG of 24.3. We can now go to the performance page, checking the transition altitude, which is correct for 6,000 feet. Thrust reduction acceleration, standard at 1,500 feet above aerodrome level. We are, 630 feet here, so 130. For both, we don't have any specific engine out procedures, obstacle clearance procedures, noise abatement procedures either for runway 27. So we can have a standard thrust reduction and acceleration at 1,500 feet, and the engine out acceleration can remain at 1,500 feet above aerodrome level as well. And the figures that I have for the departure, we're going to be taking off using flap 1. Trim of 0.5 nose up, and we can flex to 65 degrees. This gives us a reduced thrust setting, which we try and do in all takeoffs as it helps to reduce engine wear and also fuel consumption on the departure as well. So flex to 65 and a V1 of 129, VR 129, and a V2 of 131. And that's the performance completed and the FMGS completed as well. We're getting close to starting up now and getting ready to go. Passengers are almost boarded. So at this stage we can start the auxiliary power unit. We select the master switch on first, and we're going to wait a few seconds before selecting the start push button. The APU page automatically engages on the lower ECAM screen. I'm going to select the start push button now. The APU goes through a self-test phase, it then starts up. And we have an increase in exhaust gas temperature showing successful ignition, and the N1 increasing as well. When the APU is ready to provide us with electrical power, we'll have a veil light showing here on the top of the screen and on the start push button as well. Once the APU is available, we can select the APU bleed to on, and we'll leave the external power connected for the moment, as this helps to reduce the load on the APU. You can see that once the APU bleed has been selected on, we have bleed air being provided to the packs, and so the fault lights extinguish. Once we're absolutely ready to go, you can see the doors are now closed, the windows are closed as well. It's a good idea to make sure. We can also select the beacon on now, and as you can see, we've selected the flight plan page on pilot monitoring side, so he can make any necessary changes to the flight plan if required on the taxi out, and I've got takeoff on my side. We're not going to be pushing back today as we're on a fairly remote stand, which allows us to simply taxi forward, so we're going to start the engines immediately on stand. So we can run now, once we're ready, the before takeoff checklist below the line. So the windows and doors are closed, flight deck door is locked, beacon is on, FMGS is set, and the thrust levers are forward idle. And the transponder, we have auto standby and no air traffic control online at the moment, so the standby squawk has been set. And that's the before start checklist below the line complete.